At number 2, Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom. Life on the Other Side by celebrity psychic Sylvia Browne and Lindsay Harrison slips to number 3. That's followed by The Day John Died, a biography of John F. Kennedy Jr. by Christopher Anderson. At number 5, American Rhapsody by screenwriter and author Joe Esterhaus. Flags of Our Fathers by James Bradley holds steady at number 6. It's about the Marines who raised the flag at Iwo Jima. Then Me Talk Pretty One Day, a collection of humorous essays by public radio essayist David Sedaris. At number 8, In the Heart of the Sea by Nathaniel Philbrick, the story of the whale ship Essex, which inspired Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Next on the list, From Dawn to Decadence by cultural critic and historian Jacques Barzun. It's a look at Western cultural life from the 16th century to the present. And finally, In a Sunburned Country, Bill Bryson's humorous account of his travels across Australia at number 10. For book reviews and more bestseller lists, visit the New York Times website and click on Books.
Ready? Good evening and welcome to the Cato Institute. I'm David Bowes. I'm the Executive Vice President here, and I'm very pleased to have all of you. We have a perfect program tonight for this season in which we are celebrating the birth of the American Republic. We're going to be talking tonight about the history of liberty. And this really is the most important topic in American history and in the history of Western civilization. The libertarian tradition is at the core of our civilization. It has its roots in ancient Greece and ancient Israel. It developed through the Middle Ages and the early modern period, the rise of Christianity throughout the Middle Ages and into the American times. You cannot understand the world we live in without understanding libertarian ideas and without knowing something about the people that we'll be hearing about tonight. Some of you know that a couple of years ago I published my own books on the libertarian tradition, and I can't help thinking that they are complementary with the book we're talking about tonight. I wrote Libertarianism, a primer, in which I tried to lay out the basic principles and the contemporary argument for libertarianism, and I edited The Libertarian Reader, which collected about 60 of the greatest writings ever on liberty. Now, Jim Powell has written The Triumph of Liberty, which tells the story of the great champions of freedom through their individual biographies. All those books should be available in any good bookstore or from laissez-faire books at lfb.org. Of course, those of you who are here tonight will be signing Jim Powell's book, The Triumph of Liberty, after the event. Our speaker tonight has a great background for writing about the history of liberty. At the University of Chicago, he studied under the great historians William McNeill and Daniel Boorstin. As a student editor there, he published the great libertarians Milton Friedman, F.A. Hayek, George Stigler, Ludwig von Mises, and Murray Rothbard, and he was a research assistant for another Nobel laureate, Ronald Coase. He became a journalist after that and wrote more than 400 articles for publications ranging from American Heritage to the Saturday Evening Post to Reason and Liberty. He's a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, and he's the editor of Laissez-Faire Books. To write this latest book, he visited libraries, bookstores, museums, historic sites in Europe, Asia, and South America, as well as around the United States. This book, The Triumph of Liberty, a 2,000-year history told through the lives of freedom's greatest champions, is being published officially on the 4th of July by, appropriately enough, the Free Press. Jim has also created a website to talk about the book and the ideas and the history of liberty, which is libertystory.net. So now to discuss the triumph of liberty and the lives of its greatest champions, please welcome Jim Powell.
Thank you, David. It's always a delight to be back here at Cato, which has done so much for liberty. In his book, Studies on Philosophy, Politics, and Economics, F.A. Hayek explained that an important reason why socialism captured the imagination of intellectuals is that liberty ceased to be a living, relevant, inspiring idea. Hayek went on to say that more people seem to get their political ideas from history than from economics. For instance, a lot of people believe government intervention is needed to keep the economy going because they believe the stock market crash of 1929 caused the Depression and that the New Deal got us out of it. So back in 1994, I decided to tell the story of liberty through the lives of heroes and heroines as a way to try to inspire old friends for liberty and to try to win some new ones. I've been studying the history of liberty for some 4 decades, since my days at the University of Chicago, and I knew a great deal about intellectual history, economic history, legal history, and related issues, but I was quite unprepared for the extraordinary drama and the powerful emotions of this story, which I came to understand by going through hundreds of biographies and published diaries and letters and other such material. I was overwhelmed to see how much Friends of Liberty suffered, how much they persisted against what they often found to be hopeless odds, how they helped each other, and in myriad ways helped keep the cause alive. Liberty has to be one of the most thrilling stories ever told. In The Triumph of Liberty, for example, I tell the story of the amazing Swede Raoul Wallenberg, who saved almost 100,000 Jews from the gas chambers. He operated in Budapest, within Nazi-controlled territory, which meant that escape was impossible. He was armed only with a pistol, which he never used. Wallenberg's driver, Sándor Ardai, recalled one phenomenal moment. We have come to a station where a train full of Jews was on the point of leaving Germany and the death camps. The officer of the guard did not want to let us enter. Raoul Wallenberg then climbed on the roof of the train and handed in many protective passports as he could through the windows. The Nazis fired their guns and cried for him to go away, but he continued calmly to hand out passports to the hands which reached out for them. I believe that men with guns were impressed by his courage and on purpose fired above him. Afterwards, Wallenberg managed to get everybody who had the protective passports off the death train. Or take the story of Frederick Douglass, which is, among other things, about the wonder of liberty as it appeared for the first time to a runaway slave. When Douglass reached the shipbuilding port of New Bedford, Massachusetts, where he decided to settle down, he was amazed at the prosperity around him. He wrote, "I had very strangely supposed, while in slavery, that few of the comforts and scarcely any of the luxuries of life were enjoyed in the North, compared with what were enjoyed by slaveholders in the South. I probably came to this conclusion from the fact that Northern people own no slaves. I supposed that they were upon a level with the non-slaveholding population of the South, and I knew they were exceedingly poor. I had become accustomed to regard their poverty as the necessary consequence of not owning any slaves. I had somehow imbibed the opinion that in the absence of slaves, there could be no wealth and very little refinement." Douglass continued, "Here I found myself surrounded with the strongest proofs of wealth in New Bedford. Lying in the wharves and riding on the stream, I saw many ships of the finest model, in the best order and the largest size. Upon the right and the left, I was walled in by granite warehouses of the widest dimensions, stowed to their utmost capacity with the necessaries and comforts of life. Added to this, almost everybody seemed to be at work, but noiselessly so, compared with what I had been accustomed to in Baltimore. I heard no deep oaths or horrid curses against the laborers. I saw no whipping of men, but all seemed smoothly to go on. Every man appeared to understand his work and went after it with a sober yet cheerful earnestness which betokened the deep interest which he felt in what he was doing, as well as a sense of his own dignity as a man. To me, this looked exceedingly strange. From the wharves, I strolled around the town, gazing with wonder and admiration at the splendid churches, the beautiful dwellings, and finely cultivated gardens, evincing an amount of wealth, comfort, taste, and refinement such as I had never seen in slaveholding Maryland. There's a great deal of lyrical, visionary writing in the history of liberty. Take these lines by the great Irish liberator Daniel O'Connell. He said, "We will plant in our native land the constitutional tree of liberty. That noble tree will prosper and flourish in our green and fertile country. It will extend its protecting branches all over this lovely island. Beneath its sweet and sacred shade, the universal people of Ireland, Catholics and Protestants and Presbyterians and dissenters of every class, will sit in peace and union and tranquility. Commerce and trade will flourish. Industry will be rewarded. And the people, contented and happy, will see old Ireland what she ought to be. Great, glorious, and free, first flower of the earth, first gem of the sea." And yes, while researching the triumph of liberty, I found humorous moments too. When the English political exile John Locke was asked what he was doing in Holland, he reportedly replied, "I am here for the beer." As you might know, had Locke been in England at this time, he probably would have been executed as a conspirator against the king. The Scotsman Adam Smith worked on The Wealth of Nations for about a dozen years, and as soon as it was published in 1776, he began revising it. He had time for little else, except perhaps this jibe at his reputation for forgetfulness. He told his publisher, "I had almost forgot. I was the author of an inquiry concerning the wealth of nations." University of Chicago Nobel laureate George Stigler, who had documented the reasons why government regulations tend to backfire, came up with this game for children. He offered $1 million to a child who can answer 3 questions. First, who was buried in Grant's tomb? Second, whose head is on the Lincoln penny? And at this point, of course, the children began to anticipate great riches. And then came the third question, who was Adam Smith's best friend? Now, Stigler had in mind some contemporary of Smith, but on one occasion a child said, "Who was Adam Smith's best friend? Why, you are, Uncle George." And so he was. As I reflect on the story of liberty during the last 2,000 years, several points stand out to me. First, how much has been gained for liberty despite all the issues which trouble us today? Just imagine for a moment that you were living 2,000 years ago in Rome. Nobody's heard of individual rights. Freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, all of these things were utterly unknown. Marcus Tullius Cicero was beheaded for speaking out against the tyranny of Mark Antony. Murder had been common in Roman politics since at least 133 BC, when a reformer named Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus was clubbed to death by senators he disagreed with. According to the biographer Plutarch, who wrote in the 1st century AD, Rome was filled with murder, and there's no counting the executions or setting a limit to them. Rome was an empire based on military conquest and slavery. At the emporiums of Capua and Delos, some 20,000 slaves a day changed hands. Now, how was it possible to go from that world to this world? If you were living in that world, how could you possibly get from there to here? It's almost unimaginable. We've come a long way in part because many people struggle valiantly for liberty over a very long time. A dozen of the people I write about were imprisoned, another dozen were exiled, 2 were beheaded, 1 was shot to death. Despite all the obstacles, Friends for Liberty have managed to advance the cause through their ideas, their stubbornness, their persistence, and their courage. The Dutchman Hugo Grotius, convicted of defending free will in Calvinist Holland, was imprisoned, but he escaped in a trunk intended to carry his books. And he wrote his great treatise on peace, which made him the father of international law, while in impoverished exile in France. Alexis de Tocqueville completed Democracy in America, and his other important books, despite migraine headaches, neuralgia, and stomach cramps which lasted a week at a time,